The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace as tourists began gathering for the daily changing of the guard ceremony. Among the crowd stood 7-year-old Tommy Mitchell, his bright blue eyes wide with wonder as he clutched his mother Sarah's hand tightly. Tommy had autism spectrum disorder, and large crowds often overwhelmed him. But today was different. Today, he was going to see the royal guards he had been dreaming about for months. Sarah had planned this trip to London carefully, researching the best times to visit when crowds would be smaller, and making sure Tommy had his comfort items with him. His favorite red toy soldier, Captain Brave, was safely tucked in his jacket pocket, and his noise-canceling headphones hung around his neck, ready to use if the sounds became too much. Tommy had been fascinated by soldiers and guards ever since. His grandfather, a retired Army veteran, had shown him pictures and told him stories about brave men and women who protected important people. The family had traveled from their small town in Yorkshire, saving money for over a year to make this special trip happen. Tommy's father, Mark, had initially been worried about bringing Tommy to such a busy place, but Sarah convinced him that their son deserved to see the world and experience things that brought him joy. Tommy had been talking about the royal guards for weeks, practicing marching around their living room and saluting in the mirror. As they positioned themselves near the palace gates, Tommy began to show signs of excitement mixed with anxiety. He started his familiar stimming behavior, flapping his hands slightly and rocking back and forth on his heels. Other tourists nearby began to notice, and some moved away, not understanding that Tommy was simply processing the overwhelming sensory input of the crowded space. Sarah felt the familiar pang of protective sadness she experienced whenever people reacted negatively to her son's differences. The palace guards stood motionless at their posts, dressed in their iconic red tunics and tall black bearskin hats. Their polished brass buttons gleamed in the sunlight, and their rifles were held with perfect precision. To most people, they appeared as stoic statues, but Tommy saw something different in them. He saw the heroes from his grandfather's stories, the protectors who stood watch over the royal family with unwavering dedication. Tommy had spent countless hours at home learning about the guards' uniforms, their history, and their duties. He knew that the red tunics were called state dress, and that the guards had to stand perfectly still for hours at a time. He had practiced standing at attention in his bedroom, trying to remain as motionless as the guards he admired so much. His determination to be like them was both endearing and heartbreaking to his parents, who knew how much effort it took for their son to control his movements and remain calm in challenging situations. As the minutes ticked by before the ceremony, Tommy became increasingly agitated by the growing crowd. The noise level was rising and people were pressing closer together to get better views. His mother noticed his distress and began to consider whether they should move to a quieter location, even if it meant Tommy wouldn't get the clear view he had been looking forward to for so long. Just then, something unexpected happened. One of the guards, standing no more than 10 feet away from Tommy, seemed to notice the young boy's distress. While maintaining his rigid posture and forward gaze as required by protocol, Guard James Morrison had become aware of the family during his peripheral vision training. He had served for 3 years and had developed an ability to observe everything around him without moving his eyes or head. James had a younger brother with Down syndrome, and he recognized the signs of sensory overload in Tommy. He had watched. The boy's excitement turned to anxiety as more people crowded around. The guard found himself in an unusual position, wanting to help but bound by strict rules about remaining motionless and not interacting with the public during his duty. The other guard at the nearby post, Guard William Chen, had also noticed the situation developing. William had been serving for 5 years and had seen many children visit the palace, but something about Tommy's genuine fascination with the guards had caught his attention. Unlike other children who might pose for photos or try to make the guards laugh, Tommy showed a deep respect and understanding of their role that was remarkable for someone so young. As Tommy's anxiety continued to build, his mother, Sarah, began to worry that they would need to leave before the ceremony even began. She could see her son struggling to cope with the sensory overload, and she knew that pushing him beyond his limits would result in a meltdown that would be distressing for everyone involved. Mark suggested they move back, but Tommy shook his head vigorously, determined to stay and see the guards he had traveled so far to visit. The crowd continued to grow, and someone bumped into Tommy, causing him to stumble slightly. The noise of hundreds of conversations, camera clicks, and shuffling feet created a wall of sound that made Tommy cover his ears. His parents exchanged worried glances, knowing they were reaching a critical point where they might have to abandon their carefully planned visit. What happened next would change not only Tommy's day but also touch the hearts of everyone who witnessed it. Guard James Morrison, while maintaining his official stance, did something that would demonstrate the humanity behind the uniform and show that sometimes the most powerful acts of kindness come from unexpected places. The ceremony was about to begin, and the moment Tommy had dreamed of was finally arriving. But whether he would be able to enjoy it remained to be seen as his anxiety reached its peak and his parents prepared to make a difficult decision about whether to stay or protect their son from further distress. Guard James Morrison made a decision that would go against everything he had been taught about protocol during his years of service. While maintaining his rigid military posture, he slowly and deliberately moved his eyes to make direct contact with Tommy. For a brief moment, the stoic guard's expression softened almost imperceptibly, and he gave the smallest, most subtle nod toward the distressed child. Tommy immediately stopped his anxious movements. His eyes widened with surprise and wonder as he realized that one of the guards had actually acknowledged him. For a child who often felt invisible or misunderstood in social situations, this moment of recognition from his hero was nothing short of magical. He straightened his small shoulders, trying to mirror the guard's perfect posture, and attempted to stand at attention, just like he had practiced at home. Sarah noticed the immediate change in her son's demeanor and followed his gaze to the guard who had somehow managed to communicate with Tommy without breaking his official stance. She felt a surge of gratitude toward this stranger who had taken notice of her child's distress and found a way to help without compromising his duties. Mark, initially skeptical about the interaction, watched in amazement as their son's anxiety seemed to melt away. Guard William Chen, observing the positive effect his colleague's subtle gesture had on the young boy, decided to join in this quiet act of compassion. He too shifted his eyes slightly to look at Tommy, and when he was sure he had the child's attention, he executed a perfect, slow blink that somehow conveyed both acknowledgement and approval. Tommy's face lit up with the brightest smile his parents had seen in weeks. The two guards had now created an invisible connection with Tommy that transcended the barriers of protocol and crowd noise. Tommy began to mirror their stance more precisely, pulling his shoulders back and lifting his chin. He removed his toy soldier, Captain Brave, from his pocket and held it at his side in a position that resembled how the guards held their rifles. His parents watched in wonder as their usually anxious child transformed into a picture of calm confidence. Other tourists in the immediate area began to notice the silent interaction taking place. Some pulled out their phones to capture the heartwarming scene, while others simply stood in respectful silence, sensing they were witnessing something special. An elderly woman standing near the Mitchell family wiped tears from her eyes as she watched Tommy's transformation. The official changing of the guard ceremony was about to commence, but for Tommy and the two guards who had taken him under their unofficial protection, their own ceremony had already begun. Tommy had found his place among the crowd, no longer overwhelmed by the noise and movement around him. Instead, he felt part of something bigger, connected to the guards he admired so much through their shared understanding of duty, respect, and dignity. Guard Morrison reflected on how his own brother had taught him that kindness often required breaking conventional rules. His brother David had faced countless challenges due to his disability, but he had also shown James that the most meaningful connections often happened in unexpected ways. When David struggled in social situations, it was usually a small gesture from a caring stranger that made all the difference. As the ceremony officially began, the guard's commander approached their position to inspect their readiness. Both Morrison and Chen snapped to even more rigid attention, but they managed to maintain their subtle connection with Tommy through occasional glances. The commander, a veteran of 20 years of service, noticed the unusual energy in this section of the crowd but couldn't immediately identify the source. Tommy watched with intense concentration as the guards began their precise movements. Every step, every turn, every gesture was executed with military precision that captivated him completely. He had seen videos of the ceremony online, but experiencing it in person was beyond anything he had imagined. The sound of the guards' boots on the cobblestones created a rhythmic pattern that, rather than overwhelming him, seemed to calm his nervous system. Sarah marveled at how the guards had somehow known exactly what Tommy needed. In a world where her son often felt different and disconnected, these professional soldiers had found a way to include him in their world without saying a single word. She made a mental note to write a letter to the palace expressing her gratitude for the extraordinary kindness they had shown. The ceremony continued with its traditional pageantry, but Tommy's focus remained on his two special guards. He noticed how they communicated with each other through subtle cues and how they maintained their composure, despite the chaos of the crowd around them. These observations were teaching him valuable lessons about self-control and focus that would benefit him long after this day was over. Guard Chen had served in various ceremonial duties throughout his career, but he had never felt as proud of his role as he did in this moment. Helping this special child enjoy the ceremony gave new meaning to his service. He understood that being a royal guard wasn't just about protecting the monarchy. It was about representing the best qualities of service and compassion to everyone who looked up to them. As the ceremony reached its midpoint, something unexpected happened that would take this heartwarming interaction to an entirely new level. The guard's commanding officer had been observing the situation more closely than anyone realized, and he was about to make a decision that would turn Tommy's special day into an unforgettable experience that would impact his entire family. Commander Michael Harrington had served in the household division for over 2 decades, and in that time, he had seen countless interactions between his guards and the public. However, what he was witnessing today struck him as something truly extraordinary. He had been watching Tommy's transformation from an anxious child to a focused, respectful young observer, and he had noticed how Guards Morrison and Chen had managed to help the boy without compromising their duties. Commander Harrington had his own experience with special needs children through his volunteer work at a local support center during his off-duty hours. He recognized the signs of autism in Tommy and understood the significance of what his guards had accomplished. They had not only maintained their professional standards, but had also demonstrated the kind of compassion and adaptability that represented the finest qualities of military service. As the ceremony continued, the commander made a decision that would bend protocol in the most beautiful way possible. During a brief pause in the proceedings, he approached Guards Morrison and Chen's position. Speaking in the low, clipped tones that only the guards could hear, he gave them permission to interact more directly with Tommy, provided they could do so without disrupting the ceremony or compromising security. Both guards felt a surge of gratitude toward their commander for understanding the situation and trusting them to handle it appropriately. Guard Morrison was the first to act on this new freedom. During a moment when the crowd's attention was focused on the approaching band, he stepped slightly forward and executed a perfect military salute directly toward Tommy. Tommy's reaction was immediate and profound. His eyes went wide with disbelief and joy as he realized that the guard was saluting him personally. Without hesitation, Tommy returned the salute with all the precision he could muster, his small hand steady at his forehead just as his grandfather had taught him. The moment was captured by dozens of cameras, but more importantly, it was etched forever in the hearts of everyone who witnessed it. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she watched her son receive recognition from the guard he admired so much. This was more than just a kind gesture. It was a moment of complete acceptance and respect that Tommy rarely experienced in his daily life. Mark put his arm around his wife's shoulders, both of them overwhelmed by the unexpected turn their day had taken. Guard Chen, inspired by his colleague's bold move, decided to take their interaction one step further. He caught Tommy's attention, and then, with deliberate slowness, began to demonstrate the proper military stance. He adjusted his feet to show the correct positioning, straightened his shoulders to display proper bearing, and held his rifle in the textbook manner that Tommy had been trying to copy. Tommy watched intently, absorbing every detail of the instruction he was receiving from a real royal guard. He adjusted his own stance to match, moving his feet to the correct position and straightening his posture even more. He held his toy soldier Captain Brave in a position that mirrored the guard's rifle placement, creating a touching parallel between the professional soldier and the determined child. The crowd around the Mitchell family had grown quiet, sensing they were witnessing something special. Many people had stopped taking photos of the official ceremony and were instead focusing on the beautiful interaction between Tommy and the guards. Several parents in the crowd found themselves moved to tears, thinking about their own children and hoping they would encounter such kindness in their lives. An American tourist named Margaret Williams, who had been standing near the family, was so touched by what she was seeing that she began quietly explaining to her teenage daughter why this moment was so significant. She spoke about how children with special needs often faced rejection and misunderstanding, and how these guards were showing that true strength included the ability to be gentle and inclusive. Commander Harrington watched the interaction with growing pride in his men. This was exactly the kind of adaptability and human connection that made the household division special. They were not just ceremonial figures or tourist attractions. They were representatives of the best qualities of military service, including the ability to show compassion while maintaining discipline and professionalism. Tommy's confidence continued to grow with each passing moment. He began to notice other details about the guards' appearance and equipment, asking his mother quiet questions about the various insignia and decorations on their uniforms. Sarah was amazed at how focused and calm her son had become, freed from the anxiety that usually plagued him in crowded situations. Guard Morrison reflected on how this experience was changing his own understanding of his role. He had always taken pride in his ceremonial duties, but today he was learning that sometimes the most important part of serving wasn't following the rules perfectly. It was knowing when and how to bend them for a greater good. His interaction with Tommy was teaching him that true military bearing included the courage to show compassion when it was needed most. As the ceremony moved toward its conclusion, Tommy had become completely absorbed in the experience. He was no longer the overwhelmed child who had arrived that morning, struggling to cope with the crowd and noise. Instead, he had transformed into a confident young person who felt valued and included in something important. The guards had given him more than just a memorable experience. They had given him a sense of belonging and self-worth that would stay with him long after the day was over. What none of them could have predicted was that their story was about to reach an even more remarkable conclusion, one that would demonstrate just how far compassion could spread when it was given freely and received with an open heart. As the changing of the guard ceremony reached its final phase, something unprecedented began to happen. Word of Tommy's special interaction with guards Morrison and Chen had somehow spread among the other guards participating in the ceremony. Through subtle glances, slight nods, and the kind of silent communication that develops among soldiers who have served together, the story of the young boy with autism was being passed along the ranks. Sergeant David Thompson, a 15-year veteran who was leading one of the guard formations, had heard about Tommy from his position near the main gate. Thompson had a nephew with ADHD and understood the challenges that children with special needs faced in social situations. When he learned about the compassion his fellow guards were showing, he felt compelled to contribute to this spontaneous act of kindness. During the final inspection sequence, Sergeant Thompson made a decision that would surprise everyone, including his own men. As his formation marched past Tommy's position, Thompson executed a subtle but unmistakable acknowledgement. He allowed his eyes to meet Tommy's for just a moment and gave the slightest incline of his head, a gesture so small that only those watching carefully would notice it, but meaningful enough to make Tommy beam with pride. Tommy had never felt so important in his entire life. He was receiving recognition not just from one or two guards, but from multiple members of the Royal Guard. Each acknowledgement made him stand a little taller and feel a little more confident. His usual stimming behaviors had completely stopped, replaced by focused attention and genuine joy. The ripple effect of kindness continued to spread beyond just the guards. Other tourists who had been watching Tommy's journey throughout the ceremony began to show their support in their own ways. An elderly British gentleman approached Sarah and quietly commented on what a remarkable young man Tommy was, noting how respectfully he had been observing the ceremony. A family from Canada smiled warmly at Tommy and gave him encouraging thumbs up, which he proudly returned. Guard Morrison felt a deep sense of satisfaction as he watched the positive impact their actions were having not just on Tommy, but on the entire atmosphere around them. The crowd had become more patient and considerate, people were speaking more quietly, and there was a general feeling of goodwill that seemed to emanate from the simple act of including one special child in their ceremonial duties. Commander Harrington observed all of this with growing appreciation for what his men had accomplished. They had demonstrated that military discipline and human compassion were not opposing forces, but rather complementary qualities that strengthened each other. Their ability to maintain their ceremonial standards while extending kindness to Tommy showed the true professionalism that he strived to instill in all his guards. As the ceremony moved into its closing moments, Tommy noticed that his toy soldier Captain Brave had been getting quite a workout from all the proper military positioning he had been practicing. He carefully examined the small figure, checking to make sure it hadn't been damaged during his enthusiastic participation in the day's events. This simple action caught the attention of Guard Chen, who had been watching Tommy's careful treatment of his toy. Guard Chen had an idea that would require him to think quickly and act with the same courage his military training had taught him to use in more dangerous situations. During the final moments of the ceremony, when the guards were preparing to march back to their posts, Chen made a decision that would create a memory Tommy would treasure for the rest of his life. In a move that was both bold and touching, Chen reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out a small brass button, a spare that guards were required to carry for uniform maintenance. As his formation passed by Tommy's position for the final time, Chen managed to catch Tommy's eye and then, in a gesture so quick that most people missed it entirely, he tossed the button toward Tommy. The small brass button landed right at Tommy's feet, and he looked up at Guard Chen with an expression of pure wonder and gratitude. Tommy carefully picked up the button, examining it with the reverence one might show a precious jewel. This wasn't just any button. It was a real piece of a Royal Guard's uniform, given to him personally by one of his heroes. Sarah and Mark watched their son's reaction to this unexpected gift, both of them struggling to maintain their composure, as they witnessed the profound impact this small act of generosity was having on their child. Tommy held the button close to his chest, then carefully placed it in the same pocket where he kept Captain Brave, ensuring that his toy soldier would have a companion from the real Royal Guards. The ceremony concluded with the traditional musical fanfare, but for Tommy and his family, the real celebration was just beginning. As the crowds began to disperse, Tommy remained in his perfect military stance, reluctant to let this magical experience come to an end. He had spent the entire ceremony feeling valued, respected, and included in a way that rarely happened in his daily life. Commander Harrington made one final decision that would demonstrate just how deeply this experience had affected everyone involved. As the guards began to return to their regular duties, he approached the Mitchell family directly, stepping out of his official role to speak with them as one parent to another. What he had to say would ensure that this day would be remembered, not just as a tourist experience but as a life-changing moment for a special child and his family. Commander Harrington approached the Mitchell family with the measured stride that had become second nature after decades of military service. But there was a warmth in his eyes that spoke of something beyond official duty. Tommy, still clutching the brass button and standing in his best approximation of military attention, looked up at the commander with a mixture of awe and nervous excitement. "Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell," Commander Harrington began, his voice carrying the authority of his rank but softened with genuine warmth. "I wanted to personally acknowledge your son's exceptional behavior during today's ceremony. In my 23 years of service, I have rarely seen such respectful and focused attention from any observer, let alone someone so young." Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion as she listened to this distinguished officer praise her son. So often, conversations with authority figures about Tommy focused on his challenges and limitations. To hear someone in such an important position speak about Tommy's strengths and positive qualities was almost overwhelming. "Tommy," the commander continued, turning his attention directly to the boy. "You have shown the kind of respect and discipline that would make any soldier proud. Your grandfather, who served in the military, would be very impressed with how you conducted yourself today." Tommy's eyes widened at the mention of his grandfather, and he clutched Captain Brave a little tighter. He had been thinking about his grandfather throughout the ceremony, imagining how proud the old man would be to see Tommy standing among the royal guards, even if only as an observer. Commander Harrington reached into his own pocket and withdrew, something that would make this day even more unforgettable. It was an official Household Division Challenge coin, a commemorative item given only to military personnel and distinguished guests. The coin bore the emblem of the Guards and represented the highest level of recognition from the unit. "This is for you, Tommy," the commander said, placing the coin in the boy's small hand. "Consider yourself an honorary member of the Household Division. You have earned this through your exemplary behavior and your obvious respect for military service." Tommy looked down at the coin in his palm, then up at the commander, then back at the coin. His parents could see him processing this incredible moment, trying to understand the significance of what had just happened. He carefully placed the challenge coin in his pocket alongside Captain Brave and the brass button, creating a collection of treasures that would remind him of this perfect day for the rest of his life. Mark stepped forward to shake the commander's hand, his voice thick with emotion as he tried to express his family's gratitude. "Sir, you and your men have given our son something we could never have imagined. This kindness means more to our family than you could possibly know." The commander smiled and accepted the handshake warmly. "Your son reminds us all why we serve," he replied. "It's not just about ceremony and tradition. It's about protecting and honoring the best qualities in people like Tommy. He has brought out the finest in my guards today." As if summoned by some invisible signal, Guards Morrison and Chen appeared at the commander's side, having completed their ceremonial duties and changed into their regular service uniforms. They had come to meet Tommy properly, and to see how their small acts of kindness had affected the young boy who had captured their attention. "Tommy," Guard Morrison said, kneeling down to the boy's eye level, "you were the finest recruit we've had on ceremonial duty in a very long time. Your attention to detail and respect for protocol were truly impressive." Guard Chen nodded in agreement and added, "We hope you'll remember today, and know that you always have friends among the Royal Guards. You showed us that sometimes the most important part of our job isn't just standing at attention, it's paying attention to people who need to know they matter." Tommy, who often struggled with verbal communication, found words coming more easily than usual. "Thank you for seeing me," he said quietly. "Most people don't really see me, but you did, and you made me feel important." The simple honesty of Tommy's statement struck everyone present with profound force. In that moment, they all understood that this experience had been about much more than military ceremony or tourist entertainment. It had been about human connection and the power of inclusion to transform both those who give it and those who receive it. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes as she watched her son interact with these remarkable men who had chosen to see beyond his differences to his essential worth as a human being. She knew that Tommy would carry this experience with him always, and that it would serve as a source of strength and confidence during the challenging times that lay ahead in his journey with autism. The afternoon sun was beginning to cast longer shadows across the palace grounds, and the Mitchell family knew their magical day was drawing to a close. But before they left, there was one more surprise waiting for them. Something that would ensure Tommy's connection to the Royal Guards would extend far beyond this single day. Commander Harrington had one final gesture that would demonstrate just how deeply this encounter had affected everyone involved, and it would provide Tommy with something he could treasure and share with others who might need to see that kindness and acceptance were always possible, even in the most unexpected places. Commander Harrington reached into his briefcase and withdrew an official letter bearing the emblem of the Household Division. "Tommy," he said, presenting the document to the amazed child, "this is an official invitation for you and your family to return to the palace in 6 months for a private behind-the-scenes tour of our facilities. You'll get to see how we train, where we live, and learn more about the history of the guards you admire so much." Tommy's hands trembled slightly as he held the official invitation, his parents looking over his shoulder in disbelief. A private tour of Buckingham Palace was something most people could only dream of, and it was being offered to their son as recognition of the positive impact he had made on the guards during a single ceremony. Furthermore, the commander continued, I would like to invite Tommy to participate in our annual Children's Charity Day, where young people with special needs are invited to experience military activities adapted for their abilities. Tommy would be a wonderful addition to our program, and I believe the other children would benefit greatly from meeting someone who understands the true meaning of courage and respect. The invitation represented far more than just another visit to London. It was a formal acknowledgement that Tommy belonged in this world of honor and service, that his differences were not barriers but rather unique strengths that could contribute to something larger than himself. For a child who often felt isolated by his autism, this acceptance from such a prestigious institution was transformative. Guard Morrison stepped forward with his own contribution to Tommy's growing collection of treasures. From his pocket, he produced a small regimental patch, the kind worn on military uniforms to denote unit affiliation. This patch represents our brotherhood, he explained to Tommy. When you wear this, remember that you're part of something special, and that we're proud to call you our friend. Tommy carefully accepted the patch, examining the intricate embroidery and bright colors. He understood that this wasn't just a souvenir. It was a symbol of acceptance and belonging that connected him to these remarkable men who had chosen to see his worth despite his differences. Guard Chen had his own surprise for Tommy. He presented, the boy with a small booklet containing the history of the household division, complete with photographs and explanations of various ceremonies and traditions. This will help you learn even more about us, Chen explained. And when you come back for your tour, you'll be one of our most knowledgeable visitors. As the presentation of gifts and honors continued, Tommy began to realize that this day had changed him in ways he was only beginning to understand. The anxiety and self-doubt that usually plagued him in social situations had been replaced by confidence and a sense of belonging. He had discovered that when people took the time to see past his surface differences, they could find qualities worth celebrating and encouraging. Sarah and Mark exchanged glances that communicated volumes about what they were witnessing. Their son, who they loved deeply but worried about constantly, was being celebrated and honored by some of the most respected military personnel in the country. The validation Tommy was receiving would strengthen him for years to come, providing a foundation of positive self-worth that would help him navigate the challenges of growing up with autism. Commander Harrington had one final surprise that would ensure Tommy's story would inspire others. Mrs. Mitchell, he said, turning to Sarah, with your permission, we would like to share Tommy's story in our unit newsletter and on our official social media accounts. We believe his example of respect, determination, and genuine appreciation for military service could inspire other families and children. Sarah nodded enthusiastically, understanding that sharing Tommy's story could help other children with special needs and their families see that acceptance and inclusion were possible in unexpected places. Tommy's experience could serve as a beacon of hope for parents who worried about their children finding their place in the world. As the afternoon drew to a close, the Mitchell family prepared to leave the palace grounds, their hearts full and their perspective on the future forever changed. Tommy walked between his parents, his posture straighter and his confidence radiating in a way they had never seen before. In his pockets he carried the brass button, the challenge coin, the regimental patch, and the invitation. Tangible reminders of a day when kindness triumphed over protocol and acceptance conquered difference. The guards who had participated in Tommy's transformation watched the family leave, each of them changed by the experience as well. They had learned that their roles extended far beyond ceremonial duties, and that sometimes the most important service they could provide was simply recognizing the worth and dignity of every person who looked to them as symbols of honor and protection. 6 months later, when Tommy returned for his private tour, he would bring with him a newfound confidence and social skills that had developed from his positive experience with the guards. The boy who had once struggled with crowds and social anxiety had become a young advocate for acceptance and inclusion, sharing his story with other children and families facing similar challenges. The Royal Guard's simple acts of compassion toward a child with special needs had created ripples that extended far beyond that single day at Buckingham Palace. Tommy's story became a reminder that true strength lies not in rigid adherence to rules, but in the wisdom to know when compassion should guide our actions. In seeing Tommy's worth and treating him with dignity and respect, the Guards had demonstrated the highest ideals of their service while giving one special child the confidence to believe in himself and his place in the world.